The warning lights on Kim Tae's control panel blinked red like angry eyes in the darkness. His small salvage ship, the Wanderer, shook violently as it fell through the thin atmosphere of the ice moon, Cathara 7. Sparks flew from broken circuits above his head. The smell of burning metal filled the cramped cockpit. "Come on, old girl," Kim Tae muttered, fighting with the controls. "Don't die on me now." The ship had been his home for 3 years. He made his living finding old wrecks and broken equipment floating in space, then selling whatever useful parts he could salvage. It was lonely work, but it paid enough to keep him fed and his ship running. At least it used to keep his ship running. The power core had started failing 2 days ago. Kim Tae thought he could make it to the nearest repair station, but the universe had other plans. An unexpected solar storm had knocked out his navigation systems and pushed him off course. Now he was crashing on a moon he had never heard of, in a star system that wasn't on any of his charts. The ground rushed up to meet him. Kim Tae pulled back on the controls with all his strength. The ship's nose lifted slightly, but not enough. He was going to hit hard. The Wanderer slammed into the frozen surface with a sound like thunder. Kim Tae's safety harness cut into his chest as the ship bounced and skidded across the ice. Metal screamed against stone. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, everything went quiet. Kim Tae hung in his seat, breathing hard. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead. His ears were ringing, but he was alive. The ship's emergency lights cast a dim red glow over the controls. Most of the systems were dead. He unbuckled his harness and stood up slowly. His legs shook, but they held him. The ship was tilted at a strange angle, and walking to the back compartment felt like climbing a hill. Kim Tae grabbed his emergency kit and a heavy coat from a storage locker. The temperature gauge showed -40 degrees outside. The airlock still worked, which was a small miracle. Kim Tae stepped out into a world of white and blue. The ice stretched away in all directions, flat and empty under a pale sun. The sky was the color of old steel. His breath came out in white clouds that froze and fell to the ground like tiny snowflakes. But the ice wasn't completely flat. In the distance, Kim Tae could see strange shapes rising from the surface. They looked almost like buildings, but wrong. Somehow, too smooth, too perfect. They caught the sunlight and threw it back in rainbow colors. Kim Tae walked around his ship to check the damage. It was bad. The landing gear was completely destroyed. One wing was cracked down the middle. The worst part was the power core housing. It had split open when they crashed, spilling coolant fluid across the ice. Without the coolant, the core would overheat and explode if he tried to restart it. He needed replacement parts, and he needed them fast. His emergency supplies would last maybe 5 days if he was careful. After that, he would freeze to death on this empty moon. The strange structures in the distance were his only hope. Maybe they were ruins from some old civilization. Ruins sometimes had useful technology, even if it was broken. Kim Tae had made a career out of fixing broken things. The walk to the nearest structure took 2 hours. The ice was slippery, and Kim Tae fell down 3 times. Each time the cold bit through his coat like sharp teeth, but he kept going. Giving up wasn't in his nature. Up close, the structure was even stranger than he had thought. It wasn't made of metal or stone. It looked like crystal, but crystal didn't grow in perfect rectangular shapes. The walls were smooth as glass and clear enough to see through, but there was something inside that made looking difficult. The light bent and twisted in ways that hurt his eyes. Kim Tae walked around the base of the structure. It was about the size of a small house and maybe 30 feet tall. There were no doors or windows that he could see. The whole thing seemed to be carved from one enormous piece of crystal. Then he saw what was inside, and his breath caught in his throat. It was a creature unlike anything Kim Tae had ever seen. It had the basic shape of something he might call a dragon, if dragons were real. 4 legs, 2 wings, a long neck, and a tail that could probably crush a man. But this was no fairy tale monster. The creature's hide looked like metal that had been polished to mirror brightness. Its scales shifted color as Kim Tae moved, sometimes silver, sometimes deep blue, sometimes purple like sunset clouds. The creature was huge. Even curled up as it was, it would probably be longer than Kim Tae's ship. Its wings were folded against its body, but he could see they were torn and damaged. Old scars crossed its hide in patterns that looked almost like writing. But the most disturbing thing was that the creature wasn't dead. Kim Tae could see its chest rising and falling slowly. Frost covered its scales and its eyes were closed, but it was definitely breathing. It was alive inside that crystal prison. Kim Tae pressed his hand against the crystal wall. It was warm to the touch, which should have been impossible in this cold. He could feel a faint vibration, like the hum of machinery deep underground. This wasn't a natural crystal formation. It was some kind of technology, and it was keeping the creature alive. But why would someone want to keep a dragon frozen in a crystal cage? Kim Tae walked to another structure nearby. Inside was another creature, smaller than the first but clearly the same species. This one looked younger, with brighter scales and no scars. Its wings were intact, and Kim Tae could see strange markings along their edges that might have been natural patterns or might have been tattoos. A third structure held another creature, and a fourth held two creatures together. They were everywhere Kim Tae looked, dozens of crystal prisons stretching across the ice field. Each one held one or more of the dragon-like beings. This was no ruin. This was a graveyard, or maybe a zoo. Either way, it was the most disturbing thing Kim Tae had ever seen. He took out his scanner and pointed it at the nearest crystal structure. The readings made no sense. The scanner showed massive energy signatures, complex electromagnetic fields, and what looked like biological life signs. But it also showed technology patterns that were completely alien to anything in Kim Tae's database. One thing was clear, though. The energy systems were failing. The power readings were dropping slowly but steadily. Whatever was keeping these creatures alive wasn't going to last much longer. Kim Tae looked at the nearest dragon and made a decision that would change everything. He couldn't fix his ship without parts, and he couldn't get parts without exploring this place. But more than that, he couldn't walk away from creatures that were trapped and dying. It went against everything he knew about first contact protocols. It went against common sense. But Kim Tae had never been accused of having too much common sense. He was going to free them. Kim Tae stood in front of the crystal prison for a long time, watching the dragon creature breathe. The frost on its scales caught the pale sunlight and made tiny rainbows on the ice beneath his feet. He had seen many strange things during his years as a salvage operator, but nothing like this. The creature was beautiful in a way that made his chest feel tight. Even sleeping, even trapped, it looked powerful and proud. The scars on its hide told stories of old battles. The careful way its wings were folded suggested intelligence, not just animal instinct. Kim Tae walked around the crystal structure again, looking for any kind of control panel or access point. The surface was smooth everywhere except for one spot near the base. There, barely visible unless you looked from just the right angle, were symbols carved into the crystal. They looked like letters, but not from any language Kim Tae knew. He took out his translation device and pointed it at the symbols. The small screen flickered and showed error messages. His translator was designed for the major galactic languages, not ancient alien writing. But it did manage to identify some basic concepts. Words like prison and punishment and eternal sleep appeared on the screen before it gave up completely. Kim Tae put the translator away and knelt down to examine the base of the crystal more closely. The warmth he had felt earlier was stronger here. When he pressed his ear against the crystal, he could hear a faint humming sound, like machinery working deep underground. There had to be some kind of power source keeping the creatures alive, and the crystal solid. If he could find the power system, maybe he could understand how the prison worked. And if he could understand how it worked, maybe he could figure out how to turn it off. Kim Tae went back to his crashed ship and gathered his tools. His engineering kit was basic but complete. He had cutting torches, power cells, scanners, and a collection of universal connectors that could interface with most alien technology. He also grabbed some food and water. This might take a while. The sun was setting by the time he returned to the crystal prison. The ice moon had a short day and the temperature was dropping fast. Kim Tae set up a small heating unit and got to work. He started by scanning the base of the crystal with every sensor he had. Slowly, a picture began to form. The crystal structure was hollow at the bottom. Underneath, there was a complex network of tubes and wires and things that might have been computer circuits. It all connected to something deeper underground, something that his scanners couldn't penetrate. Kim Tae found what looked like an access hatch hidden beneath a layer of ice. He melted the ice away with his cutting torch and discovered a panel covered in more alien symbols. This time, his translator managed to pick out a few more words. Life support active. Prison integrity normal. Time remaining unknown. That last phrase made Kim Tae's stomach clench. Time remaining for what? For the creature to stay alive? For the prison to keep working? Either way, it didn't sound good. He tried to pry open the access panel with a crowbar. The metal bent, but the panel didn't budge. Kim Tae tried his cutting torch next, but the material was some kind of super strong alloy that just absorbed the heat. Finally, he tried something that probably wasn't very smart, but was very human. He hit the panel with a wrench as hard as he could. The panel popped open with a soft click. Inside was a maze of alien electronics that hurt to look at. The circuits were three-dimensional, twisting through space in impossible patterns. Lights blinked in colors that didn't have names, but Kim Tae had been fixing broken machines his whole life, and some things were universal. There were power conduits, data lines, and control processors. They just looked different from human technology. He traced the power flow with his scanner and found the main control node. It was a crystalline cube about the size of his fist, pulsing with soft blue light. Attached to it were dozens of fiber optic cables that disappeared into the ice. Kim Tae hesitated. He had no idea what would happen if he started messing with alien prison technology. The creature might wake up angry and try to kill him. The crystal might collapse and crush the creature inside. The whole system might overload and explode, but the power readings were definitely dropping. His scanner showed the prison's life support systems were at 60% and falling slowly. If he did nothing, the creature would die anyway. Kim Tae took a deep breath and started disconnecting cables. The first cable he unplugged made the crystal flicker like a bad light bulb. The second cable made the humming sound change pitch. The third cable made the creature inside stir slightly, its massive head turning a few inches to one side. That was when Kim Tae realized the creature's eyes were open and looking right at him. The eyes were the color of molten gold with pupils like vertical slits. They were intelligent eyes, aware eyes, eyes that had seen centuries of pain and imprisonment. They studied Kim Tae with an intensity that made him want to step backward. But he didn't step backward. Instead, he held up one hand in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture and kept working with the other hand. The creature's eyes followed his every movement. When Kim Tae pulled out another cable, the crystal became more transparent. When he rerouted power from the prison systems to the life support systems, the creature's breathing became deeper and stronger. It took 3 hours of careful work, but finally Kim Tae found the main lock mechanism. It was a complex system of energy barriers and molecular bonds that kept the crystal solid and the creature trapped. The good news was that it was designed to be opened, probably for maintenance or prisoner transfer. The bad news was that it required a specific sequence of commands that Kim Tae didn't know. So he did what humans do best when faced with an impossible problem. He improvised. Kim Tae connected his ship's emergency power cell to the prison's control system and started feeding it random electrical pulses. Most of them did nothing. Some of them made warning lights blink, but one sequence of pulses made something click deep in the machinery. The crystal began to crack. It started as a hairline fracture near the top and spread downward like a spider web. The creature inside pushed against the weakening walls with its powerful legs. More cracks appeared. The humming sound grew louder and higher pitched. Then, with a sound like breaking glass, the crystal shattered completely. The creature fell forward onto the ice, free for the first time in centuries. It was even bigger than Kim Tae had thought, easily 20 feet long, not counting the tail. Its scales gleamed like metal in the light of his work lamps. For a moment, neither of them moved. Kim Tae stood frozen with his tools in his hands. The creature lay on the ice, breathing hard and staring at this small alien who had just done the impossible. Then the creature spoke. The words were in a language Kim Tae had never heard, deep and musical and full of sounds no human throat could make. But his damaged translator caught a few fragments. Who and why, and something that might have been thank you. Kim Tae smiled and did the most human thing possible. He walked forward, knelt down next to the enormous dragon, and gently patted its scarred snout. "It's okay," he said. "You're free now." The dragon creature stood slowly on shaking legs. Ice and crystal fragments fell from its scales like broken jewelry. Kim Tae stepped back to give it room, but he kept his hands visible and his movements calm. He had no idea what this being was capable of, but he could see intelligence in those golden eyes. The creature stretched its wings carefully, testing muscles that hadn't moved in centuries. The wings were magnificent even with the old tears and scars. When fully extended, they were wider than Kim Tae's entire ship. The membrane between the wing bones was translucent, showing delicate patterns of veins that glowed with faint inner light. "My name is Kim Tae," he said slowly, pointing to himself. "I'm human. I came from up there." He pointed at the sky where his ship had fallen. The dragon tilted its massive head, studying him. When it spoke again, Kim Tae's translator caught more words. The device was learning, slowly building a vocabulary from context. "You are small," the creature said, its voice like distant thunder. "You are not hegemony." Kim Tae shook his head. "I don't know what hegemony means. I just crashed here. My ship is broken." The dragon's eyes widened, showing more gold than pupils. It said something long and complicated that made the translator smoke and spark. Kim Tae hit the device a few times until it started working again. "You do not know the hegemony?" the creature asked. "They are the ones who put us in the ice prisons." "No," Kim Tae said. "I've never heard of them. Where I come from, humans are still pretty new to space travel. We don't know about most alien races yet." The dragon stared at him for a long moment. Then it did something Kim Tae didn't expect. It laughed. The sound was like wind chimes made of silver bells. "A baby species," it said. "A baby species freed HFY, son of the Skylords, from a prison that has held him for 500 years. HFY? Kim Tae repeated. "Is that your name?" "I am HFY of the Valkyrie," the dragon said, lowering its great head in what might have been a bow. "I was a warrior prince before the hegemony destroyed my people and scattered us across the ice. You, small human, have done what their best scientists said was impossible." Kim Tae felt his face get warm. "I'm not that special. I just fix broken things for a living. Your prison was broken, so I fixed it." HFY made that silver bell sound again. "You think our prison was broken?" "Well, yeah," Kim Tae said. "The power was failing. The life support systems were running down. In maybe a few more years, you all would have died." The dragon's expression grew serious. "The prisons were designed to fail, human. We were not meant to sleep forever. We were meant to die slowly, over centuries, so that our suffering would last as long as possible." Kim Tae felt sick. "That's horrible." "The hegemony fears what they cannot control," HFY said. "My people were guardians once. We protected the small species from those who would prey upon them. We fought against slavery and oppression. The hegemony could not allow such resistance to exist." Kim Tae looked around at all the crystal prisons scattered across the ice field. "How many of you are there?" "On this moon? Perhaps 3,000. Across the galaxy? Who knows? The hegemony has been hunting Valkyrie for 1,000 years. 3,000, Kim Tae whispered. He thought about his small collection of tools and power cells. "I don't think I have enough equipment to free everyone." "Perhaps not everyone," HFY agreed. "But you could free some, and those you free could help you free others." Kim Tae nodded slowly. It made sense. He was good at fixing things, but he was only one person. If he could train others to help, they could work faster. Can you show me how your people's technology works? He asked. Vexhai's golden eyes lit up. You would trust us with your knowledge, share your methods with an alien species? Kim Tae shrugged. Why not? We're all stuck on this ice ball together. Might as well help each other. The dragon stared at him again, and Kim Tae wondered if he had said something wrong. Then Vexhai bowed his head much lower than before. The legends of my people speak of a species that would come from the void, he said quietly. Small in body, but vast in spirit. Quick to anger, but quicker to forgive. They would help others not for reward or glory, but simply because it was right. Sounds like humans, Kim Tae said. We're pretty stubborn about helping people even when it gets us in trouble. They worked together for the next several hours. Vexhai couldn't fit his claws into the control panels, but his knowledge of Velkari biotechnology was invaluable. He explained how his people had once merged organic and mechanical systems in ways that human science had never imagined. The prison systems weren't just alien technology. They were Velkari technology, corrupted and turned against its creators. The hegemony had captured Velkari engineers and forced them to design the ultimate prison for their own people. That's even more horrible, Kim Tae said as he worked to free the second dragon. This one was smaller and younger looking, with bright silver scales instead of Vexhai's deep blue. Her name is Nixara, Vexhai said. She was my daughter's age when they took us. A scientist, not a warrior. Kim Tae's hands moved faster. The idea of keeping a young person trapped for centuries made his anger burn hot in his chest. He rerouted power cables and bypassed security systems with quick, efficient movements. When Nixara's crystal began to crack, Kim Tae was ready with warm blankets from his ship's emergency kit. The young Velkari fell forward into his arms, shivering and weak. She was barely half Vexhai's size, but she was still much larger than a human. She spoke in rapid musical Velkari. Vexhai translated. She asks who you are and why you smell like metal and electricity. I'm an engineer, Kim Tae said, helping Nixara steady herself. I work with machines. Nixara touched his hands with one claw tip, very gently. She said something else. She says your life force feels different from any species she has encountered. Vexhai translated. Chaotic but determined. Like a star that burns too bright but refuses to die. I'll take that as a compliment, Kim Tae said. As the ice moons, short day ended, they had freed 12 Velkari. Each one reacted to Kim Tae with the same mixture of amazement and gratitude. They couldn't believe that a member of an unknown species had risked everything to help them. But Kim Tae was starting to worry about more than just freeing prisoners. His scanner had detected ship signatures in the outer system, heading toward the moon. Someone knew he was here, and they were coming to investigate. Vexhai, he said as they worked on the 13th prison. You said the hegemony still patrols this area. What happens if they find us? The great dragon's golden eyes grew, hard as stone. Then we fight, he said simply, and this time we do not fight alone. The hegemony patrol ships arrived at dawn, 3 sleek vessels that moved through space like metal sharks. Kim Tae watched them on his scanner as they entered orbit around the ice moon. They were definitely military ships built for speed and firepower. How much time do we have? Vexhai asked, stretching his wings in the pale morning light. Kim Tae checked his instruments. Maybe 6 hours before they land. Maybe less if they detect what we're doing down here. 27 Velkari had been freed during the long night. They stood among the shattered remains of their crystal prisons, testing wings that hadn't flown in centuries and voices that hadn't sung in even longer. Some were warriors like Vexhai, scarred and proud. Others were scientists, artists, teachers, children who had been imprisoned before they could grow up. All of them looked to Kim Tae for answers, which was both flattering and terrifying. We can't free everyone before they get here, Kim Tae said, running calculations in his head. Even if we work as fast as possible, there are still thousands of prisons left. Then we must choose, said an elderly Velkari named Korthak. His scales were white with age, but his golden eyes were sharp. Free the warriors first. We will need defenders. No, said Nixara, her voice high and musical. Free the engineers. And scientists first. We need knowledge to defeat the hegemony technology. The Velkari began to argue among themselves in their singing language. Kim Tae listened to the debate with growing frustration. They were wasting precious time. "Stop," he said loudly. The Velkari fell silent, surprised by the authority in the small human's voice. "We don't have time to argue. I have a better idea." Kim Tae walked to the center of the group, his boots crunching on crystal fragments. "You all know your technology better than I do, and you know which of your people have the skills we need most. So instead of freeing them one at a time, we're going to free them all at once." Vexhai tilted his great head. "That is impossible, small friend. The prison systems are connected, yes, but each requires individual release codes. Not if we override the whole system," Kim Tae said with a grin that probably looked crazy. "Nixara, you said you were a scientist. What did you study?" "Energy manipulation," the young Velkari replied. "Quantum field dynamics and bioelectrical interfaces." "Perfect. Korthak, what about you?" "I was a keeper of the old knowledge," the elderly dragon said. "I know the deep technologies that built these prisons." Kim Tae nodded. "Here's what we're going to do. The prisons all connect to a central power grid underground. If we can access that grid and feed it the right kind of energy pulse, we can trigger a cascade failure that will shatter every crystal on this moon at the same time." The Velkari stared at him. Vexhai was the first to speak. "Human, that would require precise timing, enormous amounts of power, and perfect understanding of systems we have not used in 5 centuries. The slightest mistake would kill everyone, still trapped. Or," Kim Tae said, "it would free them all and give us an army to fight the hegemony." "You are insane," Nixara said, but there was admiration in her voice. "Probably," Kim Tae agreed. "But I'm also human, which means I'm too stupid to know when something is impossible." They worked through the morning with desperate efficiency. Korthak guided them to the central power nexus, a massive chamber buried deep beneath the ice. The Adi walls were covered with crystal conduits that pulsed with energy patterns too complex for human eyes to follow. Nixara and the other scientist Velkari mapped the energy flows while Kim Tae jury-rigged connections between his ship's power cells and the alien systems. It shouldn't have worked. Human technology and Velkari biotechnology operated on completely different principles. But Kim Tae had spent his whole life making impossible connections work. He used copper wire to bridge quantum field generators. He modified his ship's emergency power core to output energy in patterns that matched Velkari neural rhythms. He even took apart his translator and used its processing units to create a crude interface between human and alien control systems. The result was a machine that no engineer from either species would have believed could function. It was part starship engine, part alien biotech, part salvaged junk, and part pure human stubbornness. "This cannot possibly work," said Velinar, a Velkari engineer who had been freed in the third group. "Hika, probably not," Kim Tae said, making final adjustments to the control system. "But let's try it anyway." The hegemony ships were descending through the atmosphere when Kim Tae activated his impossible machine. Energy surged through the underground conduits like liquid lightning. The entire ice field began to vibrate with a deep, thrumming note that seemed to come from the planet's core. On the surface, 3,000 crystal prisons began to crack at exactly the same moment. The sound was indescribable. Imagine every wind, chime in the universe ringing at once, mixed with the roar of breaking glaciers and the song of whales calling across infinite oceans. The ice field lit up like a galaxy of stars as energy poured out of the shattering crystals. Then, in the sudden silence that followed, 3,000 Velkari drew their first free breaths in 5 centuries. They rose from the ruins of their prisons, like a storm of living metal and light. Warriors with scales like armor and claws like swords. Scientists whose minds held the secrets of the universe. Artists whose songs could reshape matter at the quantum level. Elders whose memories reached back to the dawn of galactic civilization. And leading them all was Kim Tae, a human salvage operator who had just accomplished the impossible with spare parts and sheer bloody-minded determination. The hegemony patrol ships landed just as the last crystal stopped falling. Captain Lee Bora stepped out of the lead ship with 50 armed soldiers behind her. She was a tall woman with sharp features and cold eyes, wearing the black uniform of Hegemony Security. She stopped dead when she saw what waited for her on the ice. "Impossible," she whispered. Kim Tae walked forward to meet her, flanked by Vex-Hai and a dozen other warrior Velkari. Behind them, the newly freed dragons spread their wings and filled the sky with their presence. "Hi there," Kim Tae said, cheerfully. "I'm Kim Tae, and these are my friends. I think we need to talk." Captain Lee Bora's hand moved to her weapon, but Vex-Hai made a low rumbling sound that suggested that would be a very bad idea. "You have interfered with Hegemony property," the captain said, trying to keep her voice steady. "By law, you must surrender yourself for questioning." Kim Tae looked around at the 3,000 freed Velkari surrounding them. Some were flexing claws that could cut through steel. Others were gathering energy in their throats for the devastating plasma breath that had once made them masters of space combat. "I don't think your law applies here anymore," he said. Above them, more Velkari were taking to the sky. Their wings caught the sunlight and threw it back in patterns of gold and silver and deep electric blue. For the first time in 500 years, dragons were flying free under an alien sun. And at the center of it all stood a human who had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy, armed with nothing but a toolkit and an unshakable belief that everyone deserved to be free. The standoff lasted exactly 30 seconds. Then Captain Lee Bora made the mistake of reaching for her communicator to call for reinforcements. Vex-Hai moved faster than anything that size should have been able to move. One moment he was standing beside Kim Tae. The next, his massive claw was wrapped gently but firmly around the captain's wrist. The communicator fell to the ice with a soft crack. "I suggest you reconsider," the great dragon said in perfect galactic standard. His translator had been working much better since Nixara fixed it with Velkari biotechnology. Captain Lee Bora stared up at Vex-Hai's golden eyes and went very pale. "You're speaking. The prisoners can speak." "We were never animals," Vex-Hai said softly. "We are Velkari. We built the first star roads. We taught younger races to reach for the sky. We protected those who could not protect themselves, and your Hegemony feared us for it." Kim Tae stepped forward. "Captain, I don't know what your people told you about the Velkari, but I've spent the last 2 days with them. They're not monsters. They're just people who happen to be born with wings and scales instead of smooth skin. They're dangerous," Captain Lee Bora said, but her voice lacked conviction. "The Hegemony archives say they conquered dozens of worlds." "The Hegemony archives lie," said Korthak, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries. "We conquered no worlds. We liberated them from tyrants who enslaved their people and stripped their resources. More Hegemony ships were arriving in orbit. Kim Tae could see them on his scanner, at least a dozen heavy cruisers moving into attack formation. The patrol captain had called for backup before landing. "We need to move," he told Vex-Hai. "They're going to bombard the surface." But the great dragon smiled, showing teeth like polished swords. "Let them try." What happened next was unlike anything in Kim Tae's experience. The Velkari didn't panic or run or hide. Instead, they began to sing. It started with Korthak, a low, harmonic note that seemed to come from deep in his chest. Nixara joined him, her higher voice weaving around his like silver thread. Then Vex-Hai added his powerful bass, and more voices joined in, and more, until all 3,000 Velkari were singing together. The song had no words that Kim Tae could understand, but he felt its meaning in his bones. It was a song of freedom, of defiance, of wings that had been clipped but not broken. It was the sound of a people remembering who they used to be, and as they sang, the Velkari began to change. Their scales brightened and shifted color. Their wings spread wide and caught fire with inner light. Energy crackled between their claws and gathered in their throats. They rose into the air as one, a living storm of dragon fire and lightning. "Impossible," Captain Lee Bora whispered. "The prison nanites should have suppressed their abilities permanently. Human engineering is very good at breaking things that are supposed to be unbreakable," Kim Tae said with pride. The first Hegemony attack came from orbit, plasma beams designed to sterilize the planet's surface. But the beams struck an invisible barrier 50 meters above the ice and scattered like light through a prism. The Velkari had created a planetary shield using nothing but their combined will and bioelectric fields. The second attack came from the patrol ships that had already landed. Captain Lee Bora's soldiers opened fire with energy weapons that should have been able to cut through tank armor. The weapons did absolutely nothing. The energy beams passed right through the Velkari as if they were made of smoke. Phase shifting. Nixara called down to Kim Tae, her voice filled with joy. We had forgotten we could do this. Thank you for reminding us what we are. Kim Tae grinned and gave her a thumbs up. He didn't entirely understand what was happening, but he knew awesome when he saw it. The battle that followed was less like a fight and more like a force of nature. The Velkari flowed across the battlefield like living, lightning, too fast to target and too numerous to stop. They didn't kill the hegemony soldiers, but they dismantled their weapons and equipment with surgical precision. Some Velkari fought with claws and fangs and plasma breath. Others used abilities that Kim Tae had never imagined. Velinar could manipulate gravity, making enemy soldiers float helplessly in the air. A warrior named Zethmos could create solid constructs out of pure energy. Nixara turned invisible and reappeared behind enemy lines to disable their communications. But the most incredible sight was HFY in full combat mode. The warrior prince moved like poetry written in violence, his massive form dancing between enemy attacks with impossible grace. When he roared, the sound shattered ice for kilometers in every direction. Kim Tae found himself in the middle of it all, completely out of his depth, but having the time of his life. He couldn't fly or turn invisible or breathe plasma, but he could think tactically and solve problems on the fly. Nixara, he called through his communicator. Can you get to their command ship and hack their navigation systems? What do you want me to do to them? She asked, her voice crackling with static as she phased through solid matter. Make them fly in circles, Kim Tae said. Really tight circles. Fast as possible. 3 minutes later, the hegemony command ship was spinning like a top. Its crew, too dizzy to fight back. The other ships tried to assist, but Kim Tae had more ideas. Korthak, can your people create electromagnetic pulses? Of course, young friend. How large do you need them? Big enough to disable a fleet. The ancient Velkari laughed like distant thunder. It will be my pleasure. The electromagnetic storm that followed knocked out every piece of hegemony technology within 100 kilometers. Ships fell out of the sky with dead engines. Weapons stopped working. Even Captain Lee Bora's fancy black uniform stopped regulating her body temperature. In less than an hour, the entire hegemony task force was defeated, disarmed, and sitting on the ice in their underwear, shivering and wondering how they had lost a battle against prisoners who had been locked up for 5 centuries. Kim Tae walked over to Captain Lee Bora and offered her his emergency coat. She took it gratefully, though she still looked stunned. I don't understand, she said. The hegemony has been fighting the Velkari for 1,000 years. We know their capabilities. This should not have been possible. You were fighting the Velkari, as they used to be, Kim Tae explained. Broken, scattered, alone. These Velkari have something their ancestors never had. What? Kim Tae smiled and gestured toward the sky, where thousands of dragons were flying in perfect formation, their scales glowing like stars against the pale sun. They have hope, he said, and a really stubborn human who doesn't know when to quit. HFY landed beside them with a sound like controlled thunder. The immediate threat is ended, he reported, but this is only the beginning. The hegemony will send larger fleets when these ships fail to report in. Kim Tae nodded. Then we'd better get ready for them. Captain Lee Bora, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. The captain looked suspicious. What kind of offer? Join us, Kim Tae said simply. Help us free the rest of the Velkari across the galaxy. Help us build something better than the hegemony. You're insane, she said. Probably, Kim Tae agreed. But look around. Insane seems to be working pretty well for us. Above them, the Velkari continued their victory song, their voices carrying across tide. 6 months later, Kim Tae stood on the observation deck of the Velkari ship Dawn's Promise, watching a liberation fleet prepare to jump to hyperspace. 50 vessels moved in perfect formation around the flagship, their hulls gleaming with biometallic, armor that shifted color like oil on water. They were beautiful ships, grown rather than built, shaped by Velkhari biotechnology and human engineering working together. Kimte had helped design the fusion reactors that powered them, while Nixara had created the living computer systems that guided them through space. "Nervous?" asked Vexhai, folding his great wings as he landed beside the human. Kimte shrugged. "Always. This is the biggest operation we've attempted so far." The target was Xerion Prime, a heavily fortified hegemony world where intelligence reports suggested over 10,000 Velkhari were imprisoned in underground facilities. It would be the largest liberation in galactic history if they succeeded. If they failed, it would be the end of their rebellion. "The scouts report that Admiral Song Gite has assembled a defense fleet of over 200 ships," Vexhai said. "He commands the hegemony's most experienced officers." 200 ships against 50, Kimte mused. "Those are terrible odds." "For them," Vexhai said with a dragon's grin. Kimte had to smile. The great warrior had learned human humor during their months together, and he used it at the most unexpected moments. The liberation movement had grown beyond anything Kimte had imagined. Word of the Cathara 7 victory had spread across the galaxy through secret channels. Oppressed species on dozens of worlds had reached out, offering support and intelligence. Even some hegemony citizens, disgusted by their government's brutality, had begun helping the rebellion. Captain Lee Bora had been one of the first converts. She now commanded a mixed squadron of defected hegemony ships and captured vessels. Her crew's a mixture of former enemies united by a common cause. She had painted her flagship bright blue with silver dragons, a sight that reportedly gave hegemony admirals nightmares. But the real strength of the liberation fleet wasn't in ships or weapons. It was in the Velkhari themselves. The ancient dragons had remembered abilities that their captors never knew existed. They could communicate across vast distances through quantum-entangled thought patterns. They could manipulate space-time to create temporary wormholes for faster-than-light travel. They could even merge their consciousness with their ship's biocomputers, creating hybrid entities that were part dragon, part starship. Most importantly, they had remembered how to work together as a unified force. "Jump coordinates are locked. N," reported Nixara from the bridge. The young scientist had grown into a formidable ship commander, though she still liked to explain complex physics to Kimte when she was excited. "All ships report ready," added Korthak. The ancient keeper of knowledge now served as the fleet's strategic coordinator, his centuries of experience invaluable in planning operations. Kimte took a deep breath. "Then let's go free some dragons." The jump to hyperspace was unlike anything in human experience. Velkhari ships didn't tear holes in reality like human vessels did. Instead, they sang their way between dimensions, their biohulls resonating with frequencies that existed in the spaces between atoms. They emerged from hyperspace in the Xerion system to find Admiral Song Gite's fleet waiting for them. The hegemony ships were arranged in a perfect defensive formation around the planet, their weapons already charging for maximum firepower. "This is Admiral Song Gite of the Hegemony Defense Force," came the transmission on all frequencies. "You are in violation of Galactic Law Code 77 Alpha. Surrender immediately, or be destroyed." Kimte looked at Vexhai, who nodded. The dragon opened a channel to the entire enemy fleet. "This is Vexhai, son of the Sky Lords, Prince of the Velkhari." His voice boomed across space. "We do not recognize your authority over free beings. Release our people, or face the consequences." "The Velkhari are property of the hegemony, Admiral," Song replied coldly. "We will not negotiate with terrorists." "Then you have chosen war," Vexhai said simply. What followed was a battle that would be studied by military academers for centuries to come. The hegemony fleet had superior numbers and firepower, but the Velkhari had advantages that no amount of conventional weapons could overcome. They fought like a flock of birds, each dragon pilot moving in perfect harmony with all the others. When the enemy concentrated fire on one section of the fleet, The targeted ship simply phased out of normal space and reappeared behind enemy lines. Kim Tae coordinated the battle from the Dawn's promise, his human tactical instincts working in perfect synchronization with Valkyrie strategic thinking. He suggested unconventional maneuvers that confused the enemy, while the dragons executed them with supernatural precision. "Nixara, can you hack their targeting computers?" he asked during a brief lull in the fighting. "Already done," she replied, cheerfully. "Their weapons are now targeting each other instead of us." "Kortak, what's the status on the planetary shields?" "Failing under the combined songs of our deep space specialists," the ancient dragon reported. "The prison facilities will be accessible in approximately 7 minutes. Admiral Songite made one last desperate attempt to stop them, ordering his entire fleet to ram the Valkyrie ships in a suicidal charge. But the dragons simply opened a series of temporary wormholes, sending the attacking vessels into empty space light years away. The admiral himself was captured when his flagship's crew, led by a young officer named Na Ye-yun, mutinied and surrendered to Captain Lee Bora. It seemed that even loyal hegemony officers had limits to what they would do in the name of duty. The liberation of Zarian Prime took 3 hours. 10,000 Valkyrie rose from underground prisons, their songs of freedom echoing across the planet's surface. Ancient elders who remembered the time before the hegemony emerged from the deepest cells. Young dragons who had never seen the sky spread their wings for the first time. But the most emotional moment came when Kim Tae met Thexara, the last surviving Valkyrie queen. She was ancient beyond measure, her silver scales dimmed by centuries of captivity, but her golden eyes still blazed with inner fire. "So you are the human who has awakened my people," she said, her voice like distant music. "I just fixed some broken locks," Kim Tae said modestly. "Your people did the rest." Thexara smiled, an expression both terrible and beautiful on a dragon's face. "You did far more than that, young human. You gave us something we had lost. You gave us hope." The Liberation Fleet grew after Zarian Prime. Freed Valkyrie joined the cause, bringing knowledge of other prison worlds and hidden strongholds. Defecting hegemony personnel provided intelligence and ships. Representatives from oppressed species throughout the galaxy arrived to pledge support. Within a year, what had started as one human's simple desire to help had grown into a galactic revolution. Kim Tae found himself appointed as the first human ambassador to the restored Valkyrie Dominion, a position he never wanted but couldn't refuse. His main job seemed to be explaining to various alien dignitaries why humans did inexplicably helpful things for complete strangers. "It's just what we do," he would say, usually while working on some impossible engineering project that would benefit everyone except himself. The war with the hegemony continued for 3 more years, but the outcome was never really in doubt. An empire built on oppression cannot stand against people fighting for their freedom, especially when those people have wings and breathe plasma. The final battle took place at Hegemony Prime, the capital world where the ruling council had governed, through fear for over 1,000 years. The Liberation Fleet arrived to find the planet's defenses already disabled by internal revolts. The hegemony had collapsed from within, its own citizens refusing to support a regime that had brought nothing but suffering to the galaxy. Kim Tae stood on the steps of the former Hegemony Palace with Vexhai, Nixara, and thousands of other beings from dozens of species. The ancient symbols of oppression were being removed from the building's walls, replaced by new emblems of freedom and cooperation. "So what do we do now?" Kim Tae asked. "We've freed everyone we can find. We've defeated the tyrants. What comes next?" Vexhai looked up at the sky where Valkyrie were flying alongside human shuttles, hegemony defectors, and representatives from hundreds of newly liberated worlds. "Now we build something better," the great dragon said. "A galaxy where no being is enslaved, where differences are celebrated instead of feared, where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them." "Sounds like a lot of work," Kim Tae said with a grin. "The best kind of work," Nixara added, landing beside them with her scales shimmering in the afternoon sun. "The kind that helps people." Kim Tae nodded and pulled out his toolkit. Somewhere in the distance he could hear the sound of broken systems that needed fixing. oppressed peoples who needed freedom, and impossible problems that needed human-style solutions. "Well then," he said, rolling up his sleeves, "let's get to work." The galaxy was a big place full of challenges and wonders. There would always be more dragons to free, more tyrants to defeat, and more impossible things that needed to be made possible. But Kim Tae was human, which meant he was too stubborn to quit and too optimistic to despair. And now he had 3,000 dragon friends who felt exactly the same way.